Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Chris Stottinger with Pretty Gritty Tours tonight with the Foss Waterway Seaport, and we have brought to you one of the last presentations we'll be doing with the Foss for a while. And yes, I don't know if you were expecting this, but it's a crappy topic tonight. We are talking about poop, marine disposal units, and poop. And where does it go? Why is it in the water all throughout Puget Sound? And yes, heads up, there's a lot of poop in Puget Sound. Not all of it from us. The biomass of poop in Puget Sound comes from a variety of sources, some which would surprise you. Some of it, marine species out there. Fish poop a lot. That's just something that happens. We expect that. Discharge from sewers is another one. And then also contaminants from things like dogs can get flushed down storm drains and then out into Puget Sound. If it hits the ground, it's in the sound, as they say. But tonight, specifically, what we're going to talk about is marine discharge from vessels and how we've gotten to this point where Puget Sound is now considered a no discharge zone, meaning throughout the entirety of Puget Sound, you cannot discharge human waste off of your boats, treated or otherwise. And that is a pretty recent development in the history of this region, more recent than you might suspect. But how did we get here? And I'm so glad you asked. As always, if you guys have questions or comments along the way, please let me know. It's my pleasure to keep you informed and engaged and excited about the Puget Sound region and really all of the Pacific Northwest, Western and Eastern Washington and beyond. But today, we're talking about poop in Puget Sound. Oh, man. So Puget Sound is vital, not just as a roadway and transportation and recreational area, but the vast majority of Washington's livelihood and revenue comes from the Sound and the ports that make it up. And throughout that area, there are a whole variety of things that various watch agencies keep an eye on. And one of them is the amount of bacteria that flourishes in the water. And for Tacoma in particular, this has been an issue for a long time. We were pretty quick to get on top of it after Tacoma was selected to be the terminus for the Northern Pacific Railroad back in 1873. We really put into effect a lot of things to better enhance the health and safety of the region. And so by 1880, Tacoma had started constructing its developed sewer system in the area there. And they were designed to follow the shortest route of the tidewaters at Commencement Bay, because they would, collect the sewage from various entities and then out into the ocean it went. And I don't know what generation you're from, but you've probably heard the phrase, dilution is the solution to pollution. And I don't know if Captain Planet would agree with that here now in 2024, but this has very much been the guiding principle for a long time, that if you just jettison anything out into the ocean, hey presto, out of sight, out of mind. But what it really is out of sight, into fish, into your belly. Uh-oh. The story of sewers in Tacoma is a snaking story, if you will. And I don't know if there's a better representation of what we're talking about tonight than this right here. You can see all of the various mollusks and shellfish attached to this outflow of city sewer. It's not sewer, I don't think this one here. This is for storm water usage, but it's all connected at the end of the day. Here's a picture from early Seattle, and as always, the rivalry between Tacoma and Seattle has been very intense. And if you know me, I'm very much in Tacoma's camp in our sibling spat here. But early Seattle was just jettisoning their sewer lines, like this one here, out into Elliott Bay and Puget Sound at large. Seattle also had the approach of using cesspools, which, if you're not familiar, a cesspool and a septic tank are very comparable. It's essentially an underground pit where waste is discharged, left to settle, sometimes with bacteria or other agents, sometimes with not, and then eventually out through leaching tubes, back into the world and beyond. And cesspools, as the name implies, are disgusting. but so is jettisoning an open sewer out into the waters all around us, especially when you're a marine-based economy focused on shellfish and fishing. And so pretty quickly, the region discovered that they had to do something about it. And when I say pretty quickly, I mean like 90 years. By the 1940s and 50s, Seattle and Tacoma really started developing infrastructure into the development of better sewers. This is a picture from 1955 when the city of Tacoma hired engineers to prepare a report on long-range program sewage drainage and where that was going and how it was affecting the community. They determined, hey, shit is bad. And that the amount of poop in the region was having a negative effect on everybody here in the area. If you're familiar with the phrase the Tacoma aroma, which I imagine you are, this has come from a variety of things, not just the paper mill, but also industrial pollution in the port and wastewater, which is not a situation that was unique to Tacoma. The fact that we're in sort of a low basin where that air can pool and remain dense is unique to the region. So while a lot of other port towns were very happy to send their toxic fumes elsewhere, Tacoma kind of had to sit in their own filth at periods in our history. And so Tacoma aroma became a phrase that was coined. But that has come from anything from low tide to open sewage at various points here. So in the 1950s, there became a program that was like, hey, what should we do with the poop? Maybe if we treat it, things will go better. This was an era of development, and this is one of my favorite transitional photos. This is a photo from 1925. This is columnist Roy Beckman, and he's following the Furcrest Mystery Tunnels, where the News Tribune ran a story about tunnels under Tacoma, where they were saying that entire populations of Chinese immigrants forced out of the city during the expulsion were now living in a network underground. What actually was happening here is this is an exposed sewer line that had been abandoned, and some children found their way in and found a very large, like 42-inch in diameter catacomb underground of excavated area. And as they explored this network of tunnels, they were like, oh, for sure, something mysterious has happened here. But what was really happening is they were crawling through an abandoned sewer line. When that opened up on the edge of Chinese Lake, mystery took hold of rationale, and suddenly the story of tunnels throughout the region was rampant. And they're not entirely wrong. There was a huge abandoned network of sewers down there, and people don't like to talk about sewers as much as they should. Because things like this happen. This is a picture from 1950 that represents storm damage along the way of Ruston Way. So you can see here some of these bee stack burners or beehive burners. If you want some fun trivia, the sort of upside down ice cream cone that makes up the Museum of Glass hot shop? That is an artistic reference to, if I can bring it up here, these beehive burners. There used to be dozens of these beehive burners during the lumber industry days of Tacoma. After you would get your leftover material from the timber industry, you could put it in the bottom one of these, light it up, and then that grate on top would prevent the city from burning down, like Seattle did. And because they were everywhere, they put a visual reference to it when they constructed the Museum of Glass in the 90s. And so here we are. But what this picture is actually showing is how detrimental the damage can be to this area when there are storms and flooding. And so this, coupled with the fact that sewage was kind of just flowing out into Puget Sound, the decision was made. Something had to be done. And thus the city got together, and by the 1950s began the construction of a wastewater treatment facility. In 1962, the city built a second treatment plant known as the Western Slopes Treatment Plant along the Tacoma Narrows, actually. And that was to sort of serve the more western section. The first one was down along the Puyallup River. Eventually, we got our It's currently our second, but was, I believe, our third, historically speaking, facility. You guys might know Alan Mason. Do you know my boy Alan Mason here? Alan C. Mason was a real estate magnate and developer and a huge promoter for the city of Tacoma. You might know him best as this guy forever frozen in carbonite on the Proctor neighborhood. Alan Mason gives us the area that we consider today Mason's Gulch on the north end of Tacoma. Mason's Gulch was very famous in the early days of Tacoma because some prospectors found gold there. There was going to be a huge gold rush in the area. Spoiler alert, it didn't pan out. I'm so sorry. But Mason's Gulch ended up becoming the perfect location for a sewer treatment plant on the north end. And today, City of Tacoma has two major treatment plants. We have this one down here along the Fishing Wars Memorial Bridge. This is Central Wastewater Treatment Plant. And then we have the north end one up here in Mason's Gulch. And together, these two facilities treat all of the sewage in the city of Tacoma. Bear this in mind because it becomes deeply important to the theme of tonight, which, in case you've forgotten the title of our program, it's where does the poop from your boat go and why is it in our shellfish? The fact that the city of Tacoma has a verified sewer network and, in fact, an award-winning one. Yes, my friends, if you're not aware, both of our sewage treatment facilities are world-recognized award winners for essentially being able to forecast the future. Both these facilities sat down at one point and were like, what if something bad happens? And let's see if I have it here. The central wastewater plant was the first one to be like, hey, Tacoma has some rain issues. And if there were ever flooding in our river basin here, all of this sewage water might flow out suddenly into Puget Sound and be something of a disappointment to the area. So they did something about it and won an award for it. Here's a brief clip on that for you.
Tacoma's Central Wastewater Treatment Plant serves customers in Tacoma, Fife, Furcrest, and unincorporated Pierce County. This plant works to receive and treat millions of gallons of wastewater every day, making it a valuable asset in need of protection. Ranked among the highest flood risks in the region, the need to reduce this danger brought about the creation of the Flood Protection Project.
The Central Treatment Plant flood wall was implemented because within the last 20 years, the treatment plant here has been at risk of flooding at least 2 times. The most recent was back in 2009.
The damage caused by such a flooding event could be detrimental to the environment.
The Central Treatment Plant receives and treats about 80% of the wastewater coming from the citizens of Tacoma. That averages around 20 million gallons of wastewater per day, and during heavy rain events, we can receive over 100 million gallons of wastewater per day.
The project broke ground in spring 2014, and construction ran through March of the following year, coming in on budget and 2 months ahead of schedule. The cost to complete a project of this size came from 2 different sources.
The cost for the flood protection here at the Central Treatment Plant cost approximately $9 million. 6 of those $1 million came from the Pierce County Flood Control Zone District, and the remaining $3 million came from the wastewater ratepayers of the city of Tacoma.
Approximately 800 tons of steel was used in the creation of the flood wall.
The flood wall is made out of mild steel. It is approximately 2,500 feet in length from one end of the treatment plant to the opposite end of the treatment plant. And it is embedded in the ground approximately 15 to 25 feet underneath and with 4 to 6 feet above ground.
With any large-scale project, there are bound to be construction risks. One risk associated with the project was building around an existing pressurized water line.
We were able to carefully construct the flood wall around and below and above that 48-inch diameter water line and didn't end up causing any damage to it. So we were very happy about that.
Making up this steel barrier are pieces called sheet piles. The installation of each section was done in a practical and innovative way.
A loader has an attachment on it which picks up the sheet pile at one end, and then they have a template laid on the ground and it lines itself up, and then it slowly vibrates the sheet pile into the ground to the elevation that they want.
3 automatic floodgates used to control water flow were among the first in the state to be installed as part of the project.
If we ever did have a flooding event here at the central treatment plant, and the water started to come from the south, which is where it's expected to come from during a flooding event, the waters would first hit the south end of the plant is what's anticipated, which is where we have our 3 automatic floodgates. And those floodgates, as soon as water reaches the front face of those floodgates, they are buoyant, and then they will begin to raise all the way to their shut position and then protect the treatment plant from flooding.
The sheet piles were installed at different levels to add interest to the flood wall. The lowest point seen in the steps are the actual design elevation plus 1 foot above predicted flood levels. Rustic art pieces were also added, combining form and function to this vital addition to the region. But the most important focus of the project still stands out.
This was a very important project with respect to protecting the environment in Commencement Bay. So if this particular facility went offline due to a flooding catastrophe at the plant here, where we lost all electrical power and all of our mechanical equipment, all of that wastewater that I mentioned would no longer be treated before it's discharged into Commencement Bay, and it would instead overflow into Commencement Bay in the form of untreated wastewater. So it would be very detrimental to the environment.
Yeah, it turns out loose sewage in your water is a problem, but the city of Tacoma has an amazing wastewater treatment facility, both of them. This is the foundation of our whole point tonight, is that both of these facilities do a remarkable, award-winning job at treating the facility's sewage that comes in here. And one of the things that makes the north end one unique is that they add this chemical polymer to help settle the solids to the bottom of the tank, and then they skim off light floating material and then use this, what I love, a biological polishing filter, which is essentially a net, a lattice work that has a bacteria that eats harmful bacteria like the kind found in feces. And then they send it by gravity flow out into Commencement Bay at a depth of 90 feet, 700 feet out into the water. And this is key. After heavy treatment, that water is then released back into Commencement Bay with the toxic, nasty sediment back in the facility that gets sent to the central facility, I believe, from there, and then eventually turned into things like Tagro growing products, potting soil, things like that. Whoo! But what happens for marine discharge? This is all the stuff that we can talk about when it comes off of a boat. But Puget Sound is a no discharge zone. So when you're looking at the chart here, basically everything from New Dungeness Lighthouse and Discovery Island Lighthouse up in BC, this is a hard line here, and everything in the US waters over here, no discharge zone, meaning that nothing can be discharged from a vessel, no black water, anything that is sewage or waste from your vessel, whether treated or not. And this was a very recent development in the region, which took place April 9th, 2018, after a 5-year public process. And this is my personal opinion on this. I think no poop in the water is a great thing. But as can often happen, a lot of these really well-meaning policies can go into place without a foundation to launch from, meaning a hard edict, a line is drawn in the sand saying we have to meet this criteria by this point, and then not enough time is spent developing the steps to get to the second floor, if you know what I mean. And this is kind of the case with this one, where as soon as there was a no discharge zone established in Puget Sound, it was like whoosh, hard across the board. Recreational vessels have to now find a way to get rid of their sewage, treat it or not. And most of the recommendation was for a pump out station. You can discharge marine waste 3 miles offshore, but for those of you who know Puget Sound, that doesn't leave anything here in no discharge zone. So you would have to go out essentially into the Pacific Ocean and then you could discharge your waste, or you can go to a pump out station. And like I said, 2018 is late in the game to have the pump out, no dump out law change. Before that, feces could just be discharged into the ocean, though it had to be treated. And most recreational vessels that had a head on board, for my non-nautical friends, head means toilet, the head would have this treatment process in it, where something would be first macerated and then chemically treated to kill the bacteria in it before it would be sent out through this discharge pipe. There is a pump out port on these as well. And that's the one that becomes important now, because now that you can't discharge marine waste into Puget Sound, even if it's been macerated, meaning chewed up with one of these little beauties right here, it has to be pumped out. So despite the various levels of marine discharge sanitation that are available, all of these had to be changed. And this was their thinking, right? So here's part of the research that went into this, is that even though, I'll highlight it for you, marine sanitation devices, which grind up solids and then disinfect them, do greatly reduce the amount of fecal bacteria. But even when the devices are working properly, bacteria levels are 72 times higher than fecal standards for shellfish beds. Ah, there it is. Don't be shellfish, my friends. One of the driving moments of research for this whole thing was, don't we eat the shellfish from Puget Sound? To which there was a resounding yes. Not just we eat it and the fish in the area, but the shellfish in particular make up a huge amount of revenue for the area. So you don't want your crap in that. Nobody's, in fact. And so fecal discharge over oyster beds and shellfish beds was becoming a very serious issue. Even when ground up and sanitized, it was still way beyond the levels of fecal matter that you want in your dinner for the evening. So shellfish beds become the big rally point, but also the amount of fecal material in Puget Sound has a direct effect on the health of the region. One of the big indicators is oxygen. The more fecal material that you find in Puget Sound and the waters in the region, the less oxygen you have there, lower biodiversity, lower nutrients, everything suffers. And as it suffers, so do we. And it's become an increasing problem. The original studies that drove this EPA report found is that there were so many vessels coming into Puget Sound. This is from 2005. And this is looking at commercial fishing, ocean tugboats, harbor tugboats, large ocean-going vessels, but then also recreational vessels, ocean-going carriers, all of these things, almost 3,000 in 2005, and the numbers only gone up. And so when they were looking at boat sewage, all of this would get ground up, treated. You can't see my air quotes, but they're there. Treated and then discharged into Puget Sound, where it'd be consumed by shellfish and then by us. And it was having a huge detriment on the community as a whole. So by 2018, they're like, no means no, we're done. Recreational vessels can now no longer discharge marine waste, treated or not. And tugboats and other large operational vessels have 5 years to get on board with this program, because the loudest proponent to this change in law were tugboat operators, because the cost to retrofit a tugboat to bring it up into compliance was astronomical. Most of these vessels didn't have what was needed to hold that amount of waste so that it could be pumped out later. They had to be retrofitted on the interior to start including that, because the vast majority of a tugboat's interior is often taken up by its engine, the very thing that makes it effective at what it does, which is moving massive amounts of weight around nimbly. Not only that, though, but to retrofit tugboat isn't just itself costly, but then it has to be inspected at a very high level to allow it to become operational again. So you're looking at over $200,000 in a lot of cases for a tugboat operator to be brought up to code. And 5 years isn't necessarily enough time to make that happen. It's not like you plant the money seeds and then they just grow. It was something that was a huge issue for tugboats. The other problem was, where do they go? And here's where we get to the crux of it. While you're looking at pump out stations, right? And you're looking at where can you actually discharge your wastewater out here. These are ones in the Foss Waterway, but all of these are for recreational vessels. The report had to then look at other ones like tugboats, commercial fishing, small commercial passenger, even research vessels, which are massive, right? Not just in and of themselves larger and more difficult to navigate into these tight spaces, but also have larger shit tanks, fecal excrement containers. And I love that I'm being censored by my own device right now. But a lot of these places couldn't just discharge to wherever, because not every pump out facility has a large enough tank, right? So envision this. You are now being mandated to go pump out your waste into, like, let's say a 5-gallon bucket for our intents and purposes. You pull up on your kayak and they're like, okay, dump your waste in here. Here's our 5-gallon storage bucket. And you're like, great, I have a kiddie pool that holds 38 gallons of waste. What are we doing with that? And they're like, move on, son. You can't discharge your waste here. And this was becoming one of the major points of friction between tugboat operators and captains and the new law in the area. Because when you have all this waste, which was already vastly expensive to have a facility on board to contain it, now you don't even have a place to discharge it. We've got some problems here. So the pump out, don't dump out program really starts to take effect and has some very good promotional material like this.
Hi, I'm Sam the Clam. I live in Puget Sound, under your boats. As much as you love the Sound to play and work, it's home for me and all kinds of marine life. All of us share the Sound. Boaters follow rules to stay safe and healthy and keep our waters clean. In Puget Sound, ships and boats must keep sewage out of the water. It's called the No Discharge Zone. It covers all marine waters east of the Dungeness Lighthouse and the fresh waters of Lake Washington, Lake Union, Salmon Bay, and the Ship Canal. Dumping sewage can harm marine life and contaminate shellfish. Contaminated shellfish can make people sick. It's easy to follow the No Discharge Zone rule. Just remember, pump out, don't dump out. Puget Sound has over 100 pump out stations. Download the free Pump Out Nav app. It finds pump out stations near you and shows if you are in the No Discharge Zone. The Pump Out Nav app also guides you to restrooms and dump stations. The No Discharge Zone is already helping Puget Sound. It is opening more areas to shellfish harvesting. Hundreds of acres of commercial shellfish beds so far. This helps Washington's shellfish industry. Let's keep it clean so we can all enjoy. So, from all of us on the bottom of Puget Sound to all of you on top, thank you for pumping and not dumping your boat sewage. Learn more at pumpoutwashington.org.
First of all, pumpoutwashington.org is a phenomenal resource. And if you are a recreational boater and looking for where you can discharge your marine waste at a pump out station, they have a really handy free app that allows you to find all of the nearest pump out stations throughout Puget Sound. That said, again, personal preference here, not the official opinion of the Foss Waterway Seaport Museum. I would really like to see a version with a sort of swarthy, mean, heavy cussing Sam the Clam. One who's like, you know what? I'm real sick of your shit, people. They call me shellfish, but you guys are out here dumping everything. I think there would be a really strong case for that on TikTok. Hear me out, pumpout.org. I think there's a Sam the Shellfish for all of us. But The problem was now, where do you put your marine waste if you are a larger vessel? And so tugboats throughout the region were now having to just hold their crap until they could find some place to put it. But those were difficult to find. And a lot of them had to now rely on pump out trucks that would pull up to the dock, hook up to the vessel, pump out the waste, and then take it to a facility to be treated. Or in some cases, mobile pump out vessels. There are 23 mobile pump out vessels, which again primarily serve recreational boats. Some can service commercial vessels like big charter fishing boats or US Coast Guard vessels. But for the most part, tugboats, which are really the lifeblood of the region, don't have places that they can go and pump out. Though, this is what's changing. So currently, there are none in the region other than Point Defiance. Point Defiance has one, but it's owned by Washington State Ferries. And most of the time, when you find large enough pump out stations that can handle large amounts of commercial waste or tugboats or ocean operators, anything like that, they're already owned by Washington State Ferries primarily. Like when you're looking at this list here of all of the commercial level pump out stations throughout Puget Sound, the vast majority are Washington State Ferry and then US Navy or McNeil, Washington Department of Corrections. There aren't places where that middle ground, right? Somewhere between recreation and US Navy can go and pump out. But here's an interesting point. Point Defiance is owned by Washington State Ferries, feeds directly into Tacoma City Sewer because they have the capacity. Enter our hero of the hour, the Foss Waterway Seaport. So the Foss Waterway Seaport is now in the process of taking their marine pump out, which currently is operational. I actually don't think it's, as of the publishing of this program, operational. I think it's being retrofitted currently for recreational vessels. So for boaters going throughout the area, there's a pump out station at the seaport. But they are enlarging that to become a level 2 pump out right now so that they can start allowing tugboats and commercial vessels to be able to pump out there and directly into the Tacoma City line, which the seaport is already set up for. As a city facility, they're already attached to our sewer grid, and that water goes into our waste treatment facility. And the pipes and the ability of it to handle that amount of waste are already there. They just have to get that inlet set up there. So I believe they have the funding, and they're in the process right now of making that switch. So not just a servant of the community since the earliest days of Tacoma, back when it was the Balfour Dock building in 1900, once the world's longest grain warehouse, but now still taking all the crap that we can throw at them. The Foss Waterway Seaport is becoming a pioneer in the area, which I think is very on brand for them. By the 90s, this section of waterway that we're looking at here, this was the city waterway at the time, was one of the most polluted areas in the country and is in fact the first Superfund cleanup site throughout the country. And there was so much industrial pollution and waste in it, and a huge contributor to the Tacoma aroma, that some action had to be taken, and they cleaned that waterway and saw a huge amount of rebound to it there. And that's another step in this journey. This is another chapter in that story, is that by increasing the pump out facility there, you are now allowing for larger vessels, commercial vessels in particular, to be able to pump out in this facility. For me, that's huge. And, you know, obviously I'm biased, but it's a big deal because one of the things that I love about Tacoma is that fourth largest port in the United States, we have maintained our blue collar attitude and origins throughout the various changes of the years. And so Tacoma is still a working port, and a huge amount of our traffic and volume and livelihood comes from things like tugboats and commercial vessels. Having a place where they can offload that waste is a game changer. And it's not an increase in marine traffic. These are already vessels that are coming to the area to work and to stay. It's like if you own a restaurant, but you don't have a public bathroom available, what are you doing? Tacoma already has the facility that's being visited by these people. We're now just unlocking the bathroom so that ships can use it. And a lot of these tugboats will be able to now use the Foss Waterway Seaport's dock and pump out facility to have that sent to, again, our award-winning wastewater treatment facility right here in Tacoma. So this is a good thing that is happening to the region, and I'm heralding the good news for us, because the most recent study did find that the Foss Waterway has a very high amount of fecal material in it. Unconfirmed where that is coming from. The most recent study just found that amount of bacteria in there. It isn't known if that's coming from birds, from dog waste that's being flooded out through the stormwater system, if there's some level of marine discharge. We're not sure yet. But there's more crap in the water than there should be currently, and this is an opportunity for us to start getting it sent away to the right place. So celebrate, my friends, the increase in the pump out facility coming to the Foss Waterway Seaport in the very near future, allowing tugboats to finally use that area here. Yeah, it seems so nonsensical to avoid the topic, but again, very few online resources that discuss the handling of marine discharge and waste. And it was one of those things where I think the creation of the no discharge zone is absolutely the right thing. I do think there could have been a few more steps put into place, like increasing the amount of pump out stations available to these larger commercial vessels, because it's a huge part of our industry. You know, so much of the Alaskan fishing fleet finds its home here in Washington throughout Tacoma, Seattle area, and then goes up and works in the Alaska area. But if they don't have a place to pump out, it's difficult. And I don't think it needs to be macerated, treated, and pumped into Puget Sound. I do think it needs to be pumped out, but some more development needed to be put into place. So seeing the seaport start to develop that infrastructure for the area here, 10 out of 10, no notes. So my friends, that is really what I wanted to share with you tonight. Now, next month, August, we've got one more program with the Foss Waterway Seaport before some big changes are coming to the area that I can't talk about just yet, but I can tell you they're very exciting. So moving forward, if you have questions about poop or anything else, please let me know. As always, I'm Chris Stottinger with Pretty Gritty Tours, here tonight with the Foss Waterway Seaport's third Thursday free programming. I hope to see you all very soon. And until next time, my friends, get on out there, keep on exploring.